Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is the second launch event of Hazemag 23 Workers in the Food Chain. Today we'll be discussing subcontracting in the meat industry. Is this a chance for true reform? I'm here with Cornel Ban. Thank you very much for being here. Just some quick technical aspects before we get into it. This is now being streamed live on the ETY website, but it's also being recorded. So for anyone that you know who might be interested but would like to watch it at a later date, it will be on the ETY website and on our YouTube channel. Because of the short format of this discussion, it'll just be 20 minutes because we've decided to do 3 shorter ones for this issue, something a little different. We won't, unfortunately, have the time to take any questions. But of course, if you would like to send a question in, if you have a question, please feel free to send it to the ETY email address and we'll do our best to get back to you. I will also pass any to Cornel if he has the time. There is also, because could I also ask you to please keep your cameras and your microphones off for the duration of the discussion? That would be really helpful. And obviously just to put it in speaker's view, I think that will be perfect. You can subscribe to Hazemag for free. It's a very beautiful magazine. It comes out twice a year and it's on working conditions in the European Union and occupational health and safety. Our latest issue is Workers in the Food Chain. The print edition will be out very soon. And we've just put a link up in the chat where you'll see that you'll be able to subscribe, and we have it in English and in French. So you can choose your language. Okay, and I think that's everything for the housekeeping for now. So to start, let's get into it. I'm here with Cornel Ban today, as I said. Cornel is Associate Professor of International Political Economy at Copenhagen Business School. And I had the pleasure to interview him for the article that I wrote for this issue of Hazemag, which was on this subject of subcontracting in the meat industry, and particularly in Germany. The story began because last year there was mass COVID outbreak in a meatpacking plant in northwest Germany, which was one that got particular media spotlight because of the size of it. There were I think more than 1,500 workers tested positive in this abattoir, and it led to the lockdown of the nearby districts. So it was a story that had an international impact. The media spotlight became focused on these abattoirs, not just because of COVID-19, but also because of the working conditions of the workers there that were primarily subcontracted Eastern European migrant workers. And this has been a story for a long time, working conditions in the meat industry, in particular in relation to subcontracted migrant workers. Cornel, to start the discussion, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about why the meat industry has been such a controversial issue for so long, really more than a century actually, in terms of working conditions, and what is particular in recent decades with the growth of German meat companies. How did this subcontracting model develop, and what is the impact on the workers who work in these abattoirs?
Thanks, Beth. So the meat industry has been sort of in the spotlight for working conditions for a very long time everywhere. I mean, meat packers have a rough deal in most systems. The German case is particularly interesting, however, in the sense that Germany has a particular business model in the meat industry that's based on an extremely high level of concentration in the sector itself. So think of the fact that 3 firms in Germany, Tony's is one of them, but others as well, 3 business firms control 60% of meat processing, right? Of the pig processing, and 50% of total meat processing. This is an extremely high level of concentration. And it is also extremely concentrated regionally, as you said earlier on. This creates a system whereby a highly concentrated business model, a highly regionally concentrated industry, also relies on a rather intriguing characteristic of the German institutional environment. When we think of Germany, we think of eroded power of labor unions, but at the end of the day, it is a neo-corporative system. That erosion is not gone all the way down to French or Spanish levels. Quite the opposite, in fact. But when it comes to meat processing, there seems to be a near regulatory void there. The trade unions are not very well represented. There isn't so much labor capital negotiations, and most importantly, to get in this business model of specializing in highly concentrated, cheap meat, right? What you need to do is you have to cut some corners. And how do you cut the corners? Well, start from the fact that this is our most striking figure. If you start from the fact that Danish labor costs per person are 50% higher in the same meat processing industry. French, Dutch, and Belgian wages in the same industry are a third higher than in Germany. You wonder, how do they achieve this, right? I mean, Germany doesn't have lower wages than France. How do they do that? Well, they do it through this particular labor supply chain. Indeed, we call it dependence on very cheap East European labor, predominantly Romanian, for reasons that I can elaborate later on. That keeps the cost of labor there extremely low. There's a massive dependence on this particular labor supply, and the way it is reduced, because now since 2014 you have a minimum wage in Germany, right? So that minimum wage regulation applies to meat packers. However, the actual pay that they got was much lower than the minimum wage because of the subcontracting system. In fact, these very large firms, and we can talk about this later on, relied extensively on this very particular institutional feature that I could elaborate more on. Yes.
I see. So, and I should mention that you mentioned that the Tony's Group. The Tony's Group was the company to which belonged the abattoir where there was this mass outbreak last year. So that's quite a key player, and it's really a giant in the meat industry, along with several others. Right. So as you say, yeah, I mean, you gave some interesting points of comparison there in other countries, in terms of just the cost of labor just being incredibly low. How did this subcontracting model develop, and can you give us some more detail about what does it actually mean in practice? What is this? I think you've called it a commodity chain of recruitment that passes between the East and the West in Europe that allows this system to exist.
It's a very complex system that mixes this very particular, I would say, German-Romanian feature, in which we have a very large recruiter. We call them labor barons, effectively. For example, the largest of them, for Tony's and others, was this firm called MGM, based in Romania, which operates through very clear forms of political patronage back in the country. They also operate in some of the poorest regions of the country where, unemployment rates, Romania has low unemployment rates, but these rural areas where they recruit are very high unemployment rates, very low levels of education, very low levels of mobility. So using this kind of political props, the owner of MGM was a local politician, basically in all parties, like he changed that depending on the context.
And MGM, sorry to interrupt, is a subcontracting agency, but one of the big ones.
Yeah, the biggest one. It is the biggest.
It is the biggest one, I see.
The most reliable, Tony's brags about MGM, and MGM brags about Tony's and the relationship.
Very open. And so Tony's would give a contract to MGM and say, well, we need so many workers in this abattoir.
Right. So we're doing this, right? Just to put it in very visual terms. So there's this local recruiter. They have loads of buses and small vans. And these vans leave from a certain point in the county of Dâmbovița, in the southern part of Romania, on a daily basis. Yeah, they give you the equipment, the contract, the whole lot. The intermediate the entire relationship, peace of mind. Um, Basically, think of the following. The Romanian net minimum wage is 236 euros a month. You go to work for Tony's for around 1,000 net, right? It's quite a deal, right? Especially if you go for just a few months and you come back and you do it. So why did this model survive for so long? It survives for so long because this labor wasn't, theoretically coerced. I mean, they got higher wages and they actually got employment, which they didn't get back home. And then the northwestern part of Germany, not just Tony's benefited. This is very important for our paper, but the local communities in the areas where the big three, the big belt area benefited, they got jobs as well around the abattoirs, the nice clerical jobs, maintenance, technical, that are better paid. So there was this kind of interdependence between these two parts of Europe. It's a very interesting aspect of European integration in a dark sense, that Northwest Germany and Southern Romania were so tightly integrated through this MGM arbitrageur, in fact, right? Now, when did this model start? It started in the early 2000s. The first evidence we have of it is of a criminal sort. The first subcontractors were German insiders that operated in Romania. But soon the Romanian state cracked down on it, this kind of criminal networks. And then they went legal. And they went legal because Germany has these very lax rules on subcontracting. And then, there's the posting workers directive that allowed for it all. Interestingly, however, in addition to the large operators like MGM, there are these smaller ones that we call caporali, which is basically the model, the Southern Italian plantation model, you would call it, right? Where you have some kind of cultural insiders that trade labor, and that labor is dependent on them. And these tend to be formal workers in German abattoirs and meat processing plants who develop their own small businesses and use access to these relatively underprivileged communities, right, to negotiate information and contracts and recruit based on trust. So it's a complex system, but at the core of it was this MGM business.
I see. So, okay, yeah, so you have this this quite a complex system. You have a big plate, you have a big German companies.
Yeah.
You have also, I know, pressure along the food chain, also from retailers for meat to be very cheap, which yes, from the supermarket.
And it's so cheap that it's cheaper than in Romania. So Romanian and Polish meat processors were driven out of the market by these German plants that use Romanian labor. So there is something to be said about, of course, concentration and whatever their management style, and of course, just like bread and butter business school, making things efficient and productive. But there's also the labor aspect that enables them. I mean, the Danish processors are also very efficient and very well run, but they cannot rely on the ultra cheap labor because they apply the rules. They don't use this model that Germany has.
Yes, okay, I see. And to follow that through, then we have the company, we have the big players like agencies like MGM. Who do they organize? It's only getting the workers into the slaughterhouses in Germany, or it's the things around that, right? It's housing and transport.
They organize everything. I mean, essentially the relationship between the work. So the Romanian worker in Germany has no relationship with Tony's. They have a relationship with MGM, right? And then if something bad happens, such as the things that happened during the pandemic, right, the infections, well, Tony's then blames it on the subcontractor, and the subcontractor knows that they are paid to take the blame, right? So they assume it in a sense. So the workers' relationship is with the subcontractor, and the subcontractor does what, right? I mean, they basically reduce their information costs, right? All these workers in Romania would have no idea how to get to Germany and work in a plant. So they kind of simplify things for them, but in exchange, they charge all kinds of fees for transportation and hidden fees, etc. Second, they insure housing, which was, I mean, straight out of late 19th century, a scholar in these parts of Germany. It was, they were investigated by German health authorities and so on. Just miserable. They provide the knives, which is when the knife is a very important thing. Like it's a special knife you have to have. Effectively, these were expensive, squalid living conditions. So when you add all of that, the workers are paid a lot less than they would be paid, say, in the Netherlands or Denmark for the same labor, right? Tony's gets much lower cost, and MGM trades in between, right? This is the business model that worked very quietly for a very long time. It was impossible to change until the pandemic.
Right, and not to mention, obviously, in terms of the impact it has on the workers and the conditions and abusive practice they suffer through, you've touched upon, but obviously this was
just to illustrate,
a contributing factor to the COVID outbreak. Also, they're in such close quarters.
Just to illustrate that. So typically in meat packing, you stand up on an assembly line very close to each other, right? It's very cold. But these workers were made to work overtime a lot, unpaid, right? So there's the fatigue element, right? Then there's kind of like loss of actual, even if the rules would be applied, it would be difficult after 8 hours to keep observing them. Second, the close quarters of the way they lead, right? I mean, that also increased the risk. And yet, pandemic erupted in April, this infection happened in June or July. So they had many months to adjust. There was no adjustment whatsoever because the whole thing ran on very low cost. So again, the pressure on costs made impossible, literally, the observation of the rules.
Right. Yeah.
And what's interesting for us is that the undersupply of labor inspectors and health inspectors going into these things. I mean, you didn't have labor representatives in most of them. So in a way, health rules were enforced in a very lax manner. And this was a cost, and then German society said, we can't go there. But now it's affecting us. Because this is the core argument of our paper. At the end of the day, the reason why there was successful pressure to change the laws and ban subcontracting, and then, very importantly, temporary labor in meat processing, happened because a narrow issue, narrow quote unquote, in Germany, which was migrant labor in meat processing, became a broader issue, which was a health hazard that is effectively locked down Northwest Germany and stigmatized the communities living there. So not just the foreigners who operated in the abattoirs, but also the surrounding communities who couldn't go on vacation and fingers were pointed at them, etc., etc. And this put political pressure to change things. I mean, of course, the political mobilization of labor unions, churches, and media mattered tremendously, obviously. I mean, this is very clear. But without this opening in the opportunity structure, so to say, without the conversion of a narrow cause into a broader cause, and working through the pressure on the Northwest German communities living there, things probably will not have happened because the same actors, labor unions, churches, media, have been talking about it for a decade, right? Why did it never change? Well, because you didn't have the non-foreign labor communities being affected. You didn't have that. Now you had it, and it was very difficult to withstand that pressure. So quiet politics became loud politics. And when you have this coalition in loud politics, you can change things. I mean, that's the basic lesson that we took out of this.
Yeah, so what we've had, I mean, and this will close, it's such a massive topic to go into, but as we only have 20 to 25 minutes, exactly as you've described, obviously so many people have been active and campaigning on this issue for a long time, unionists and churches and NGOs, etc. But last year, what we had was this spark that, as you said, transformed it into what you call loud or noisy politics. It takes it into the spotlight. And obviously in December, we had the passing of the Occupational Safety and Health Inspection Act in Germany, which effectively bans subcontracting in the industry. You've mentioned your paper a few times, which you're working on with Dorothy Bowley and Marek Nasik, is that right? Which is for the ETUI journal transfer. And in this the title of this paper, you called it, "Is This Time Different?" Because obviously there have been breakthroughs before, and but also frustrations that it hasn't, perhaps moments where it seems like real change was going to happen and perhaps not deep enough. Is this time different? Is this more profound change? And is it something that, or is it something we need to push further, particularly perhaps at the European level, not only in Germany?
Yes, our conclusions is clearly a cautiously optimistic one. It is different. I mean, you can do a lot more if you merge the topic of public health with the topic of labor. That's very clear lesson, right? So before and after comparison. The second thing is pressure matters. Political mobilization of redistributive coalitions matters. We have seen a very important role in this regard of special forms of labor mobilization coming from mainstream labor unions, right, to organize the foreign workers. I would like here to highlight the role of Faire Mobilität in Germany, who have been absolutely heroic about this, but also a couple of, less conventional. This is more associated with the DGB and so on.
Faire Mobilität, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, if you could just briefly explain.
Exactly. But there were others as well, sort of more fringe left forms of labor activism, also church organizations in the area. Those we would like to flag as well. So there was a broader coalition. There was international and domestic media attention. The Romanian state did not do very much. I mean, this is also kind of predictable because they take a very dim view of labor organization in the Romanian government. I mean, there was some Romanian media mobilization, but not that much. So the third thing we would like to say is that, look, even if this is, this German regulation has real teeth, right? I mean, this is illegal now to use the subcontractors. It's illegal to use temporary labor. So this is big. It's not big, yeah. That. But already the German big belt giants are talking about moving to Spain and Poland, right? So voila. The cheap labor, cheap meat model cannot continue if the rules that are coming out now are applied. Moreover, labor unions are using this moment to move the goalposts. So now they're asking for a higher minimum wage in the industry itself, right, across the board. That, of course, is an outcome that's to be decided by the balance of power between the various forces in Germany. But clearly, unless we have a form of transnational labor organizing of the sector itself, this is very vulnerable sector from labor standpoint, unless we have European regulations that provide the minimum safety net for these workers, this business model is going to move elsewhere. So then, instead of having Romanians in Germany, you're going to have probably Ukrainians in Poland being treated like this, right? Until the next, I mean, and the dark lesson is here, right? I mean, do we have to wait for a pandemic for things to change? Another pandemic or like, 36 wave of COVID? So in that sense, we're cautiously optimistic in the sense that, yeah, I mean, you can change things, but it takes a catastrophic outcome in public health to do it. So I think this is an opportunity. The pandemic is not over yet, to push things at the European level. And to do something about this poor level of unionization in the sector itself, right? I mean, of course, there's the Danish model, for example, that we could look at and export that perhaps. But if they move to the UK or to Spain or to Poland, we haven't really achieved much, I mean, honestly.
Exactly. It needs a far more holistic approach, and we need to seize this opportunity. I know this is something that FAT is also trying to do. Cornel, we've sadly run out of time, but thank you very much. It's a fascinating insight into it's a big issue, as I said. Obviously, your article will be out in the autumn, I think.
Yes, and yeah, so my quotas, and if people want to take a look at the first version that we have, we're very happy to very happy to share that. But I have to touch base with them.
Okay, that's great. And of course, I will remind you again, please subscribe to Hazer Mag. It's really a great magazine, and there you can read more about it. Okay, thank you very much to everyone for coming.
Lovely.
Thank you, Connie.